Well, you're probably back home now after a hard day's work and then spending a couple of hours at least on the road. Did you know, viewers, that there is a very clear law in our country that limits a work day to 8 hours in any office, in any job? Anything more than 8 hours should be ideally considered overtime. You should be paid for it and you should be compensated for overtime, every hour of overtime separately. But how many of us actually follow that rule? A rule that ensures employees only work for 5 days. Well, a petition has now surfaced online and 60,000 supporters have signed that petition in less than 3 days. The petition is addressed to the Prime Minister himself. It calls for the Prime Minister to intervene and to make sure that the laws about work hours are actually enforced, that our offices only require us to work for 8 hours. Can we, in fact, enforce that rule? And what happens to our economy that's thriving right now if we do? That's the question we're asking. It's an open debate, and I'm asking that question of you as well. As you sit back this evening and put up your feet, do you believe that you should only be required to work 8 hours? And if you run a business, can you run a business by only working your employees 8 hours? In fact, we stepped out today and we asked a lot of the people on the street what they thought. Listen in.
I don't agree with the idea that it should be limited to 8 hours. The time should be based on the workload which a person has got, or the companies, which way they favor the working environment in the company.
I think considering all the cost control measures which is being taken, I think flexi timing should be introduced in all the offices wherever necessary. And it's very important, it's very essential for the people to get motivated to work in that fashion also.
Travelling time is also needs to be considered in those 9 hours, I think so.
We have to balance our both lives, personal and professional. The work will go on, but it hampers the personal life.
8 to 10 hours is fine, and more than working hours, there should be like work from home concept. So rather than calculating the number of hours, it all should depend on the work which you have been given, whether you are doing it or not.
It should be limited to 8 hours so that we can finish our work in 8 hours and we can go back home, give time to our family.
It cannot be limited by, because in today's scenario, it has to be like the demand is more. So a lady has to work 1 hour more because sometimes the bosses are not available for your decisions. So it's okay.
12 घंटे ड्यूटी से खूब परेशान होता है, थोड़ा काम होने से अच्छे होता है, आराम होता है.
Efficiency gets maintained when you work for 8 hours a day, and certainly between the personal and the work-life balance has to be there. So certainly the 8 hours limitations has to be there in the work life.
It is totally perfect because we have a lot of time, 24 hours it is there, and if you work for 8 hours, I think it's totally fine. And in that 8 hours also we have a break time, and there are a lot of offices where you can go off to sleep also. So they are providing these facilities also. So I think for the development of country, we should work for 8 hours at least.
If you're married, you have a family back home, and if you're not married, then your girlfriend or your boyfriend. And less stressful.
Actually, nowadays I see people work at home itself, like home also after they work for 8 hours and they come back and then also work. So it's like, I don't think so it is like restricted to 8 hours.
Well, very interesting voices coming in from across the country, and I'd like to point out to our viewers that there was a marked age difference between those who said 8 hours and those who said you can't really limit the number of hours that one needs to work. It does seem, of course, like young India wants a better work-life balance. But is it something that can work for our country? That's the question we're asking. Of course, we're also asking what happens when we have an entire workforce that's working itself to the bone. Do we then become the diabetes and the blood pressure and the heart disease capital of the world, something that we're very close to already becoming? Should we then consider what happens to our GDP when all of those healthcare costs of treating all of those ailments caused by stress then finally winds up back on the system? The question we are asking to you today, should you only be working 8 hours a day? Joining me on the show this evening, Dr. Harish Shetty, psychiatrist. Swapnil Kothari, senior lawyer. Syed Asad Abbas is a media professional, and we know media professionals never work only 8 hours. Pankaj Bansal is the CEO and founder of People Strong, leading a startup, which is also an interesting area these days that's working many, many hours and trying to achieve a lot of things. Sumanth C Raman, sports and political commentator, Niranjan Shetty, spokesperson of the BJP, and Sujay Khandawala has been kind enough to join us again on this debate. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. I want to start by bringing in Syed Abbas. Tell me, do you believe that people should only be working 8 hours, and is that a practical thing to enforce?
Well, honestly, it's quite difficult to see a blanket version of 8 hours working ability, because there are different jobs, different people, and so much more attracting towards it. Especially coming to the entrepreneur side, which we see quite a boom in Bangalore and so many other cities in India. 8 hours would absolutely not be sufficient, because you would be working much more than that. I think it's to each person's ability. When you love what you do and do what you love, I think even 16 or 24 hours isn't sufficient. So that would be very generic to call it 8-hour blanket shift to everybody. I think that would definitely depend on person to person, job to job, and every single individual profile. So it's I think we need to do a census overall as to what is most suitable to one particular job, and then accordingly take a decision on that, because I'm sure doctors, engineers, and so many other professions where they would require more number of hours for projects or even emergency operations. So I would say, if you're very passionate about it and you love your job, 8 hours isn't definitely not sufficient enough. But keeping again the productivity and being efficient, again, you know, that would be a question better answered by the experts. To me, if you ask me, being a media professional, what 8 hours? Even the double 16 hours is definitely not sufficient. So I think that would be very individualistic how we would like to take forward. So, but again,
okay, let me bring in the lawyers, because when you say that, you know, to each his own, the one thing that doesn't work in that system is the law, because the law is very clear and the law is uniform across the country to all professions. Sajay, I'm going to come to you first. The law very clearly states 8 hours is a work day. Anything more than 8 hours is overtime. So can it really be to each his own, to each business his own?
I agree with what Abbas is saying, and I was just wondering what Swapnil and I, the two lawyers on the show, would be thinking, that the other 16 hours, what are we going to do for the other 16 hours? You know, we are all so programmed to work, and we are so motivated, and we love our jobs. See, when you love your job and you enjoy, and there's a thrill in what you're doing. For example, that's what you're doing, Faye. I mean, I have got to know from your juniors over here, you work sometimes 17 hours. So, I mean, because you love your job. But see, ultimately, balance is the key in life. We have to balance our lives. We have to give something to ourselves. Because you said diabetes, hypertension.
Yes.
You cannot afford to. We all want to have long, healthy lives. So ultimately, balance is the key. Your family life.
This is interesting. You know, Sajay and Swapnil, normally when the two of you are on my panel, you're very clear about the fact that the law is the law and we must all follow the law. And those people who don't follow the law should be prosecuted, which is what this petition is calling for. And the law is very clear. For example, and I'm reading out of this right now, workers should not work for more than 9 hours a day or more, 48 hours in any week. And the research that we have done points out that doctors, resident doctors, work an average of 105 hours a week. The Indian Nursing Council works 100 hours a week. That, Kareena Kapoor and Shah Rukh Khan apparently used to work 20 hours a day. I mean, this is a norm. It's become cool in India to break the law. Swapnil.
Well, I would like to phrase that a little bit differently. I wouldn't say that it would amount to an infraction of the law, for the simple reason that, the main governing law in this case is the Factories Act 1948, which talks about 9 hours a day and 48 hours a week. And it doesn't draw any distinction between a public company and a private unit. And, the fact remains that since the past 69 years, since its inception of this act, there have been hardly any cases on the work hours bit. And secondly, after adopting the Constitution in 1950, I would still look at Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution, which says right to livelihood. And who is to define how many hours do I need to earn my livelihood? So that is one of the main reasons why these I think most of the labor laws, be it the Factories Act, Minimum Wages Act, Payment of Wages Act, Payment of Bonus Act, Payment of Gratuity Act, and there's a slew of other acts which I don't want to waste time illustrating them, have basically are a sort of, I think, a guidepost to the employers so as to not extract or inhuman hours out of a human being or out of the people that are employed.
If you're talking about 16, 17 hours, who's defining what is inhuman?
That's correct.
I'll only say one more thing, Swapnil, we are all proud to know that we have a Prime Minister who himself works 17 to 18 hours a day.
Perfect.
So I mean, that I guess answers a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
Let me point out, this petition actually surfaced because of the stories of the fact that the Prime Minister works 20 hours a day, that the new Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh works 20 hours a day.
Bachelors.
They're bachelors. Sujay points out that they're bachelors. Dr. Harish Shetty, what happens to us when we work 20 hours a day, or when we feel the peer pressure or the pressure in the office to work 20 hours a day? Because the petition also points out, and I'm opening out this up to our viewers, that anyone who insists on working 8 hours a day is treated like a shirker, is treated like someone who doesn't take their job seriously, doesn't love what they do, and wants to go home because he's not taking his work seriously enough. So if you're feeling the pressure to stay 12 hours, 16 hours, what does that do to us mentally and physically?
Long working hours creates a lot of problems in the neuroendocrinological system. The organs get very angry, the glands get very angry, the pancreas says, I will not release my insulin, the blood vessels say, I'll increase your pressure, the limbic system says, I will not release enough neurotransmitters to feel happy, and so there is a breakdown in the body orchestra, mind-body orchestra. So you see road rage on the roads, you see domestic violence at home, you see teachers hitting children, parents hitting children, you see diabetes, depression, hypertension going up, you see a lot of lifestyle diseases, both physical and mental, going up. Emotional contact time in the family goes down. The parents go and ask children only about their homework, they don't ask them about their well-being. The family contact time goes down. Disconnection happens across cities and towns, and the phenomenon of disconnection is worse than HIV. I hear banks boasting about their profits, 30%, 20% growth. I hear MDs talking about going home at 5:30, playing with the children, not using their phones, but the last employee goes at 10:30. He does not go home at 5:30. So you see those profit curves, worms on TV going up, but the human cost of the same is not being explained. You see the NCRB figures, suicide figures. Family problems is one of the most important causes of suicide. So when the orchestra is disturbed, the body goes for a toss, the mind goes for a toss. You may have profits, you may have growth, you may have high GDP, but the human cost is worst. And so India is not one of the happiest nations. And somebody said that you're motivated, you have to work 14 hours, you feel good. But there's somebody back there who wants your company. There's somebody back there who wants your hug. There's somebody back there who wants to sit down with you and have a meal. And then that cost is not measured when it comes to motivation, etc.
But Dr. Harish Shetty, the law cannot possibly, account for family members and whether or not they want hugs, because then single people are going to want different laws. I want to bring in Sumanth C Raman. Sumanth C Raman, what happens when people work 16, 17 hours a day? There's an extra job there that could have gone to somebody else that doesn't get created because that one individual is occupying the slot of two, because they're doing the job of two people. And we're a country that desperately needs jobs. And one of the reasons why we work 16 hours is because of the kind of competition there is for every job and the number of available applicants who'll do what you do and do it for a lot cheaper.
Look, there are two ways of looking at it. One is, what is in the best interest of the health of the individual. That could be one way of looking at it. And the second is, what is a practical approach? Now, there are certain jobs, we already spoke about jobs like, being a doctor or being a nurse, and many other professions as well, where, an 8-hour work schedule is simply not practical, not possible. Now, you have to understand also that from a country's perspective, ease of doing business is also going to be an important thing. Now, if you're going to bring in more laws, more rules to make, this whole thing more difficult. Now, I agree with you that somebody who's probably working not 16 hours is not that common, but certainly, 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours is pretty much common or par for the course in many parts of India. So people who are working that much are taking away a part of the job of somebody else is one way of looking at it. But the point is, in an organization, especially in a private organization, where there are deadlines to be met, where there are customer expectations to be satisfied, I mean, it's going to be extremely unprofessional on the part of some individual who is a member of a team to stand up and say, look, my 8 hours are up, let's meet on Monday or not work on the weekend. So I think that
in fact, that's completely legal.
That where there are commitments, where there are deadlines to be made.
But that's completely legal. And
I know that. See, the issue is you have to understand two things. No, it's completely, look, this is what happens all over India in most organizations where there are deadlines to be met. Now, if the person refuses to work, he may be within the law. But believe me, he is not going to get promoted in the organization, and you can't do a thing about it. If he isn't promoted, he cannot go to the court and say he should have been promoted in a private organization. So you have to understand that there are certain things which are needed in the best interest of the organization. I'm not saying every day one works from 12 hours or 14 hours. I'm not saying that at all. But to have a rule which says one should not work beyond 8 hours under any circumstances, I think that is impractical, and that is actually going to do more harm to the country in the long run than any good that it will do to the individual.
In fact, I want to bring in Niranjan Shetty here, who represents the BJP. Niranjan Shetty, there is one angle that we don't consider. Let's assume, like Sumanth C Raman says, we work 10 hours or 11 hours or 12 hours. Then add to that the 2.5 hours we spend on the road, getting home or coming back to the office. Now, that is not time we're spending with our families. That totally adds up to the stress levels and to the time spent outside the house. Now we're spending 16 hours a day outside of the house. And this is true of every Indian city. We all spend that kind of time on our commute, time that could actually be spent on the life part of our work-life balance. So on some level, we need to, as a country, regulate one of the two things. Either we spend an efficient 8 hours and then clock out, or we allow the 12 or 14 hours and then we make the commute far better so that people can get home faster. Niranjan Shetty, which way is the government leaning?
No, I think I wouldn't say on the behalf of the government. Basically, I would vouch for this and support the online petition that has been done. Now, here I can see there are
not
two
bringing
eminent,
the commute down, we'd rather bring the work hours down.
No, there are two eminent lawyers. Of course, I would think I would have liked if they would have appreciated the law to be enforced. Basically, Mr. Kothari himself mentioned about the Factories Act 1948, which specifically states the working hours that has been defined. And I think they should have respected that law. And I know that as far as MNCs are concerned or private organizations are concerned, there is no time limit that needs to be done. But as Dr. Harish Shetty said, we need to understand the health hazard that comes along with it. So these are the basic facts. We don't understand what he wants to speak. I know I don't want to go into the medical transformation what he spoke just now. But then I think whatever that 8 hours has to be done, yes, as you also mentioned, that productive 8 hours. And I don't see any reason why this should not be implemented either in MNCs or any private firm.
Swapnil Kothari, can you implement it in your office and respect the law?
No, I cannot respect the law in this regard for the simple reason because it's a private contract between me and my employee, and we've decided certain terms of the contract. And if if a person after the age of 18 is eligible to vote, to drive, to make his own decisions to marry, then I think he can always decide whether it's going to hazard his health or not.
Swapnil. Now, since we're finding loopholes in the law, please allow me also. It doesn't say you can't work more than 8 or 9 hours. It says your employee has to pay you overtime. Will you pay overtime to your employees who choose as adults to work 16 hours? Then a chunk of that 16 hours is overtime that requires special pay.
That's right, I do that for the simple reason that I need to retain those employees who are industrious enough to work for me for those 16 hours, and they're giving too much of their personal time for that. So I think this is something which I would leave it to the individuals to contract. Even the International Labour Organization of the United Nations has given us a report about working hours in different countries, and they've said that these are all directory laws and directory regulations basically, but you can't
be enforced.
It is extremely difficult to enforce because then you are telling a person that, look, you need to go home, and then what, as Sujay pointed out very rightly, that what do I do after going home, and what do I do for the rest 16 hours?
What happens to, and I want to bring this up, forgive me, gentlemen, I'm the only woman on the panel, but what happens to those people who have children at home in childcare? There are women on par with men right now competing in all teams. They have children in childcare who need to be picked up, children who need to be fed and put to school. Somebody might have an aging parent who needs looking after. Now, they would all need need to give time at home. There might be gentlemen like yourself who can afford the 16 hours in the office. But the pressure, like rightfully pointed out by Sumanth C Raman, I won't get promoted, I won't get taken seriously. I'll be taken as someone who's shirking work. Sujay,
So
what happens to those people?
You have to have a flexible approach. You can't have a straight jacket formula that yes, this only 6 hours. See, it depends on different sectors where you're working, different kind of environment. Now, for example, in my office, there could be good employees and bad employees. As far as the good employees are concerned, what Swapnil said, I want to compensate them more. I want to encourage them to work better. So then they are going to be paid better. So therefore, you can't have a kind of a straight jacket formula that there is only a 7-hour shift or an 8-hour shift.
Because there are acts right now, and I want to bring in right now Pankaj Bansal, CEO and founder of People Strong, which is an HR organization. Sumanth C Raman, I'll also read out something that you'll find amusing. We have a Mines Act, a Minimum Wages Act, a BD Cigar Workers Act, a Contract Laborers Act, a Building and Other Construction Workers Act, a Plantation Labor Act. But for the benefit of Syed and for Sumanth C Raman, we have a Working Journalist Act that says that if a journalist works more than 6 hours in a day shift and 5.5 hours in a night shift, he or she shall be compensated with rest hours equal to the hours that he or she has worked overtime. I can't remember the last time a journalist worked only 6 hours in a day shift. Or he's laughing. It's impossible.
We wouldn't be having these shows.
We wouldn't be having these conversations. There would be no shows to watch. Pankaj Bansal.
So my quick 2 cents is, one is no one dies of hard work, right? And number 2,
I think the doctor would disagree with you when you say no one dies of hard work. He just told us that people do.
What I believe. And second point that I want to say, we do something called best companies to work for. The survey covers thousands of people. Almost 2/3 of the employees do not complain about any kind of workload. So there is a misnomer the way this has been projected. Number 2, the issue is flexibility. If you look at women, if you look at any category of workforce, they need flexibility and accessibility, not lesser number of work hours. It's India's time. Please let not put another legislation, and ask my lawyer friends. I would love to hear their views. Can we implement all the state acts of labor law without compromising the national law?
All right. With all due respect, this is again, let me point out, a panel full of gentlemen, and we've unfortunately put together what is now in social networking being called a manel, which is a panel of men. But if we're talking about flexible working hours for women, it's not available in all organizations, and it's not about what is on paper. It's about mindset. It's about whenever a woman gets up to say, I have to pick up my child, everybody looks at her saying, you will obviously leave at 6 o'clock every day. You don't take any of this seriously. She'll never get promoted. And that's what we're talking about. Sumanth C Raman, I see you raised your hand. I want to come to you. But to rebut what Pankaj just said, and our phone lines are open. If there's anyone who believes that it is possible to die of hard work, please pick up the phone and call us. Krishnan is on the phone line from Chennai. Krishnan, go ahead. We can hear you. Krishnan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear me.
Go ahead, Krishnan. Mute your television in the background, please, and go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I was working in an organization. It's a MNC company. Okay, after 8.5 years, I'm working.
Okay.
So basically, I got a job initially in a day shift of job. And after I switch over that, I'm working at a night shift job. I got a night shift job. And initially, we are basically from coming out from the village to moving from the metro.
Okay.
We are at least we want to get some money from out of that, whichever I earned in previous year to next year. So instead of $3,000 to earn more than that in the previous year to next year, so I joined on a night shift job, and the night shift job is still it's going 1 or 2 years it's fine. After 2 or 3 years, I'm severely affected with like I got an typhoid fever. When I go on to check with the doctor, finally they found that you had a diabetic.
Diabetes.
Like yeah, I got on diabetic.
Right. So do you support a law that that limits work hours to 8 hours?
Yes, because of unbalancing of life and using the more than working hours.
Okay, all right. So Krishnan has been diagnosed with diabetes caused from working a night shift. Sumanth C Raman?
I think it's genetic also, diabetes.
Yeah.
Well, India has the second highest number of diabetes patients in the world. Then where genetically we have a problem that can't be solved. But Sumanth C Raman, go ahead.
You know, maybe he may well have got diabetes even if he had not worked for.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying is I don't think it's fair to attribute the development of diabetes and conditions like these purely due to an extra hour or two put in at work. So I think it's quite likely that the gentleman might have developed diabetes even if he had been unemployed or had been seated, at home. So I don't think it's entirely fair. Yes, there are stress-induced ailments. There is a worsening of certain conditions medically. We know that for a fact that there are certain issues. But to say that people develop, a whole lot of range of diseases purely because they work an extra hour. I mean, I don't know whether studies have been done between people who work for 8 hours and people who work for 9 hours.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. Sumanth C Raman, please allow me to share with you the studies that have been done.
Second is you're making an assumption. No, 1 minute. No. Can I finish my point?
Yeah, finish your point.
The assumption that you're making also is that everybody is very keen to go home. Now, this we've found, I have found in certain organizations that I have been associated with, is not necessarily true. People, are not exactly jumping with joy after, maybe in the first few years of marriage, they may be very keen to go back home. After that, they actually are quite stressed out at home because there is so much of responsibilities which come on their head. So they are quite happy to spend an extra 1 hour at work. It's actually an
so that then brings me to another problem. And let me just point out, Sumanth C Raman, let me point out to you that I'm as guilty as everybody else on this panel for overshooting that 8-hour limit and perhaps also running a team that overshoots the 8-hour limit on a regular basis. But there are studies to answer your first point, which I will call out. And secondly, maybe I don't want to go home. Maybe I want to go to the park. Maybe I want to go to the gym. Maybe I want to watch a movie. Maybe I want to go shopping. Not necessarily want to go home. But there's no need for me to have to spend those hours that I want to spend away from my wife or my spouse at work. So the question we're asking outside of what happens outside of work is the 8 hours that are spent
because they don't want to go home. No, 1 minute. Not everybody may have the access to go to a pub. You may be in a small town, you may be in a semi-urban area and so on where you may actually be spending that time at work because it keeps you away from the problems that face you at home. So I'm not saying that everybody wants to go to a pub, they can, but I'm saying that there is a group of people who continue.
So actually, let me just refocus this conversation then. If we're talking about regulating the labor laws, we're also talking about paying people overtime. So if I don't actually want to go home and face the problems at home with my spouse, and I'm spending those extra 4 hours in the office, pay me overtime. How many employers right now will be willing to pay me overtime? They'll actually turn around and say, just because you have problems at home, I'm not going to pay you overtime. And to answer your question, Sumanth C Raman, that nobody dies of hard work, there is a study that shows that people who spend extra time in the office develop high blood pressure.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all.
Let me finish.
Nobody dies of hard work.
46% of India's workforce suffers from some form of stress or the other.
Of an hour or two.
Sure. No, let me just give you the statistics. 46%, that's almost half of India's workforce, suffers from some form of stress or the other, according to the latest data available. And they found that 43% have a skewed body mass index, which means that they're either overweight or underweight. 30% are at a risk of diabetes, 30% at hypertension, and 46% on stress. This leads to heart attacks. Heart attacks kill at least one person every 33 seconds in India. India is the diabetes capital. Almost, we're second only to China right now. I want to go back to the doctor on the panel, Dr. Harish Shetty.
Understood. The stress could be commuting to work, driving an hour and a half in traffic. It may not necessarily be the job. That's the point I'm trying to make.
What is very important is
be the job. It may be driving.
Okay, no, I completely buy that point. We are all far more stressed in our time on the road than we are in our time in the office, and it results in us arriving at the office already stressed out, already frazzled, and already upset. And then it happens again when we go home.
Yes.
So that I want to. In fact, there are some countries that count your commute as your work hour. Let's add that then, where we are all working 4 hours now. Dr. Harish Shetty, can anyone die of hard work?
Long working hours disturbs the sleep-awake cycle. Long working hours also increase the practice of psychologists and psychiatrists. And when the sleep-awake cycle is disturbed, what happens is these young boys whom they claim to be working for 17 hours are going to burn out by the age of 40. They are not going to burn out after 55 or 60. What is also very important is MNCs do not have the same rules for their employees in the West and in the East. Employees in the West work lesser hours in banks, international banks, than they work in India. The point is, in India, MNCs talk about paying more, squeeze them hard, and the people who work there also believe that in 2-3 years, if they earn a lot of money, they'll be good. But nobody talks about the human cost. Forget diabetes. April 7th is the World Depression Day. Depression is one of the most common causes of long working hours. Long working hours causes stress. When the stress is not handled, the person gets depressed. So depression and suicide are also very important causes for long working hours. Apart from that, relationships are crumbling because of long working hours. When you don't see each other, and when the society does not meet naturally, it mates unnaturally. So
according to Sumanth C Raman, then that can be remedied by not going home and spending more time in the office. In fact, let me bring in Dr. Shetty. Let me bring in Tapas Das, who's on the phone line from Kolkata. Tapas, go ahead very quickly. Go ahead, we can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Hello, good evening to everybody.
Good evening.
I just wanted to give you the example of two rules which is prevalent in European countries like Germany and Sweden. Like in Germany, there is a clear rule which says that organization cannot call its employees beyond the working hours. There is a clear law indicating that.
It says your boss cannot call you after you've left the office. It's a system we can barely even imagine here in India. That's a good point. I know, Pankaj, you had a point to make. Pankaj. Yeah, let me share an anecdotal story with you. I have a friend who works with the British High Commission who said that the British High Commission was shocked at the hours that the average Indian works. And we're not even talking about the doctors and the lawyers and the journalists, but the average Indian. And they actually run a 4-day work week in India in order to comply with their British rules, saying that if we work 5 days, we'll be overshooting the number of hours. So it's true, as a country, we overwork ourselves.
Okay, we are everything attributing as if these countries had not had their heydays. It's India heyday, right? When our turn comes, all these points have been put up in front of us, right? Why are we taking away the ambition from young workforce and putting it in other regulation? Number two, we have 6 crore workforce that we are talking, right? Our organized workforce is 6 crores. We are talking so much. What about the rest of the 54 crores who are unorganized? I'm so thankful to the Modi government that at least they took steps to regulate, to ease off the labor laws. At least those things are happening. So let's focus on those areas rather than thinking of new regulations. That's not the point. Only 6 crore people.
Nobody's thinking of new regulations. We're thinking of implementing the regulations that already exist. There's no need for new laws. We're talking about laws that already exist that everyone is ignoring.
Yeah, so it's not being ignored.
Look at the productivity.
You are all assuming. I don't agree that laws are ignored. There are hundreds of organizations who pay overtime. Yeah, in some of the cases by choice, we may decide not to apply for it or things like that. But there are people who are working from phones. We are talking of gig economy. What are we discussing? There is no work hour concept left. The question of work hour and a permanent job is under question. And you were talking of women. I'm on the board of India's largest women's site called Shiros. The founder of Shiros tells me that we don't want lesser working hours. We want equal opportunities. We want accessibility. We want flexibility. Okay. So we are discussing topics that I'm not able to fully appreciate.
Okay, all right. I also want to share this with you. Before we started this discussion, I had a conversation with our camera crew, and I asked them, do you believe in 8-hour work shifts? And they said, you know what? If we insist that we will only work 8 hours, we will get replaced like that. They will bring in somebody else to take our job because there are so many people willing to do the same job. Exactly. And that is symptomatic of the fact that there aren't enough jobs in our country. We're not creating jobs fast enough to mop up the kind of resources that are available. If we did, then people who wanted 8 hours would have the option of wanting it. If you are ambitious and you want to work really hard, nobody should stop you. But if you're not ambitious and you want to go home and spend time with your family, you should be allowed to do so without having to worry about losing your job. Geeta is on the phone line from Mumbai, and for the women who are watching, please pick up the phone and call us and share your opinion with us. Geeta, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Ma'am, Dr. Harish Shetty nicely covered the self part of this late working hours.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello.
Do you believe,
Yeah.
Geeta, that women find it more challenging to work the long hours because they have families to take care of?
Men, irrespective, because they have the duty towards their family, to the society, to the self, all that is there. So if I work for 8 hours and travel for 3 hours, or if I work for 10 hours, how much time would I give to my next generation? How would I bring up my next generation? Is it possible to bring up a good generation then? And when unemployment is so much in India, why is this required for late working hours? That much employment we can create for the other people. Is it not?
That's a very good point, Geeta. Thank you for calling and sharing your view with us.
And
Yes?
to add to what she's saying, I agree with her. So just understand, there is a person working at Nariman Point, and he's staying at Virar. Now, if he has to come from Virar every day to Nariman Point, he has to spend 2 hours one way. Then he has to work in his office. Again, to go back, he has to spend 2 hours. And in the train, if we know all the state of our locals. So exactly this is what we are coming to. Ultimately, what happens to you when you go back home? You have a systemic disease problem. All your genes which were latent all get up and give you diabetes and all that. Your family life goes for a toss. You cannot share good days, good evenings with your family, happy hours. So therefore, I agree with what our co-panelists are saying. So it's not only the workplace. It's this entire environment this urban city has created, where we've spent so much time commuting. And that is compounded by other problems, bad roads, traffic, and etc. So all this leads to the stress levels.
All right, let me just bring in Jayashree, who's called in from Mumbai. Jayashree, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, I congratulate you all to bring this debate. But my one thing is that there are some professions like nursing, doctors, your lawyers, journalists, or soldiers on the border who have to work day and night and they don't have a time frame. But normally, a woman, especially you brought out the woman issue, so I'm saying a woman, a lactating mother or a mother who's dealing with a toddler, if she's given sufficient time to look after her child and she knows that her child has been catered for and looked after safe, she will give better productive work to the organization. So it is the responsibility of the organization to see that she gets flexi hours and help her out. This is as far as the women are concerned. And I agree with your panelist who said a lot of time in our country goes on commuting, unproductive work, the lights go off, the power is shut, the trains are cancelled, the buses are cancelled, the BRTS routes don't function, half the roads are dug up. So
it all adds to the frustration. It all adds to the frustration. Yes, you're right. Swapnil?
Yes, as far as the women issues are concerned, I have 2 or 3 observations to make. I think as far as there is a Maternity Benefit Act, which takes care of the maternity aspect. One of the most other important things where the legislature has failed is that it has taken care of them at, of sexual harassment at workplace, etc., and all the other issues about women's safety and security. But it has failed about their promotion aspect. There is always that pressure, which Faye, as you rightly pointed out, that women are always concerned that, if I have to pick up the child, or if I have to, do some home work that needs to be done, then, I'm looked at with quizzical eyes. And there is something which I would recommend the legislature to do is to have some act like a Promotion of Women at Workplace Act, which would spell out, certain things that women should mandatorily deserve. And the MNCs, I would look at more of the private employments here because that is where there is more fiercer competition as opposed to public companies, where there are certain provisions that they need to comply with.
That's very good, Swapnil. But like we were talking about yesterday about the sexual harassment in the workplace, the Vishaka guidelines, there are plenty of laws, but who's going to monitor? Who's actually going to? I mean, the fact that we're talking about this law at all, 8 hours and then overtime, who monitors, who implements? So if we create more laws right now, and I want to acknowledge here that the central government has done a fantastic thing by increasing maternity leave from what was 3 months paid to now 6 months paid, which will make a huge difference. A huge, massive, I cannot begin to tell you, massive difference to women workers across the country. And that is a very positive move, and we need the government to continue to think in that manner. Krishna Chand is on the phone line. Krishna Chand Sharma is on the phone line from Ludhiana. He is a whole-time director of a factory. Go ahead, Mr. Sharma.
Yeah.
Go ahead, we can hear you. What is the point you'd like to make?
Yeah. Very good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, I want to say is that I have two daughters who are working in Gurgaon in MNCs.
Yes.
So they were facing the problem of overtime working.
Yes.
So my daughter had to work for Saturdays, Sundays. Even they were given the work to do their home on laptop.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to work, and so due to overpressure, one of my daughter had to quit the job. And second daughter is also she is considering to quitting the job due to that reason. Because work is so much that they are not coping, they are not able to cope up with that high pressure of work.
So you believe that there should be a regulation. Dr. Sriram is on the phone line from Chennai. Dr. Sriram, go ahead.
Yes, it is a very good topic because, this regulation of time is very, very important because everybody has to be health conscious, particularly people who are having the stressful job definitely needs rest, or they must have the capacity to control their minds through yoga or prepare a mindset that can take care of these things. So this is a very good thing. And for example, you cannot go and control the MNCs how to regulate there because they are target oriented. So it is the individual worker, he has to control, he must know his body, how it works out, and then he has to devise a method or she has to devise a method.
But this is a great question, and I'll ask the question of Niranjan Shetty. Niranjan Shetty and Sumanth C Raman, I'm going to come to you after this. Niranjan Shetty, MNCs, and several times it's been pointed out on the panel, they have very strict laws in the countries that they are actually from. But in India, they don't follow those laws. They give people laptops and tell them to work from home, work after hours, work Saturdays and Sundays. We've seen it happen repeatedly. Should there be a clearer regulation or an implementation of regulation there?
Absolutely. Faye, when these two, I would say I would have appreciated if both these eminent lawyers would have taken up the cause to, to implement such kind of 8 hours of job concept. Basically, if I say, it may sound you an absurd way of putting it, but if I say there is a speed limit of 80 km per hour to drive, and if you want to drive, if you want to reach a particular place, and if you want to drive at 120 or 200 km, it's your choice. But as Dr. Shetty says, it's your choice. You may meet with an accident and you may die. So the choice, you're asking your employees to sign a contract of 12 hours, thereby going at a speed limit of 200 per kilometer and die. And that's it. I think the safest thing is the speed limit that you need to maintain in your life. Save yourself. Secondly, I know one of my lawyers who is working continuously for so many hours, and now today he has a very, as far as his marriage is concerned. So I think I should not mention, but this is the situation was Dr. Shetty is saying. And another, there are so many complications leading to the,
Right.
Yeah.
So, Sumanth C Raman.
Yeah. See, there are two very quick points I want to make. One is regarding the point that you made earlier saying, why not we make everybody work 8 hours as per the law and actually employ more people. Now, you must understand a lot of industries have to be competitive in their pricing. And that competitive pricing comes from a current wage structure. Whether we agree it's fair or unfair is a different issue altogether. Now, that wage structure is skewed. I'll give you an example. For instance, in the IT sector, for instance. Now, if you say that people should work only 8 hours as per the law, and you cannot work beyond that, and you need to employ another set of people for doing the same job over the same period of time, then what is the kind of competitiveness that you're actually going to have? Somebody in China or somebody in Philippines will do that job at half the price and take away your business. So you have to remain competitive. That's a very, very important area that you need to attend. So it's not simply a question of saying let's provide employment to more people. You won't have businesses to run or enough of them to provide employment even to the first set of people if you go down that route. The second point was the one you made about this maternity benefits being increased to 6 months. Now, at the individual level, it's a very good thing. There's no doubt about it. But you will find as you go along, companies become even more reluctant to take on employ women. And even if they do employ women, to give them promotions and give them space higher up the organization, because 6 months would be seen as a fairly long period of time for people to be absent. And if a lady, let's say, has 2 children over a period of 3 to 4 years, which is absolutely normal in India, you will then find that they are absent for over a year in a period of 3 years. So that is disruptive. Companies will definitely, actually you might be doing more harm to the cause of women empowerment and employment by actually increasing this maternity benefit to 6 months than you would have done by taking certain other measures, like making it possible for women to have secure areas to take care of their children, creches and so on. So I think that you have to understand productivity is the third very important point that you have to keep in mind. You can say that somebody is working 8 hours, but what is the level of productivity compared to global standards? If that level of productivity is not being achieved, there's no point in saying somebody is sitting in office for 8 hours. Now that will become like your government. Government servants may put in a particular quantum of time. What is their productivity?
Mr. Raman, with due respect, I beg to differ with you on this issue for the simple reason that if productivity is important, then reproductivity also is very important. And it's a biological fact that women get pregnant, and that is the reason why I talked about...
I'm not disputing that
now, may I finish, please? Mr. Raman, when you spoke, I did not interrupt you at all. May I finish, please? So what I'm trying to say is I'm not disputing what you're saying. I'm only begging to differ on certain aspects. What I'm trying to say is that 6 months maternity benefit is an absolutely important thing. That is the reason why I talked about promotion of women at workplace. That law would take care of this kind of a thing. Now, as far as one aspect which Mr. Niranjan Shetty talked about as to why we lawyers would not try to get this sort of a law implemented or try to get it enacted. Now, if the states were to enact it, it would have to be in consonance with the central law and most importantly the Constitution. There are 2 aspects of Constitution. One is Article 19(1)(g), which is the right to livelihood. That's one where the people are free to engage into whatever sort of employment that they wish to. And the 2 is Article 14, which talks about equality, and one of the prongs of Article 14 is arbitrariness. Now, this kind of a law which talks about 8 hours, where and how do I monitor it? How do I implement it? Which companies do I force to implement it? So that will necessarily be tested on the anvil of arbitrariness. And if it fails that, then we lawyers have very, very little to convince any court of law, much less because we ourselves are not convinced about it when we look at it from the constitutional perspective.
Well, I want to bring in Syed Abbas, who's been very silent. Syed, let's accept the fact that people want to work extra hours, people want to be competitive. But if there is someone who wants to go back after 8 hours, can they be considered? Is it fair to consider them a shirker? Is it fair to consider them someone who is not serious about their jobs?
Well, I think firstly, we cannot have a uniform set for 8 hours a day. I think that cannot be one exclusive factor for all professions and for every employee who's working on the job. Most importantly, I think to each their own. We need to see which profile, what job and what particular multinational company they are working with. And humanly possible, if 8 hours they are able to complete that much set target or amount of work, I think that is okay. But there are other industries, whereas other different professions where this would not be appropriate. That would definitely require a lot more hours. So I think having a blanket uniform system, 8 hours a day for all jobs, all employees, I think I would definitely not agree with that. So yeah.
All right, we have a couple of people on the phone lines. I believe there's a lady from Delhi on the phone right now. Go ahead. Padmaja Rao. Padmaja Rao, go ahead.
Okay, good evening to all. I have a question. In fact, I would rather like to say this. When all the organizations and institutions were being set, the service designs were planned, the working hours were planned, the scope of work was being planned. Based on that, only the number of hours were planned. What suddenly has gone wrong that people can't meet their target of 9 to 10 hours of working? I understand the airlines, I understand the fire and your hospitals and all. But why in the other industry? And then I also want to say that we all say that we want to meet the target. Companies are worried about their bottom lines, brand imaging and all. Why don't we take this as a challenge that everybody works within their working hours of 9 to 10 hours and meet their target? I think that should be put on priority rather than putting their bottom line on priority, brand image on priority. I think employee image should also be on the priority. And
that's a really good point. I want to take this to Pankaj Bansal. Pankaj Bansal, if we are meeting our targets, let's remember there is a team lead who sat down and decided that target at the beginning of the year, saying, I only have 5 people. If I make these 5 people work 12 hours a day, I'll be able to achieve this target in a much lower cost than having to hire 2 extra people. So there is human intervention there. Someone has decided that this is going to be the target, and then everybody else has to work on Sunday to achieve it.
So question is, look at when you're discussing of targets and productivity, we have a huge part of robotics which is becoming a regular part of workforce, right? You go and look at, we have a huge complication there, the number of jobs which are being lost to that. And we are discussing and debating 8 hours. I'm still not able to relate to or fathom to this fact. Number 2, I've been telling you the number of jobs which have converted into so-called gig or part-time or flexi jobs. I think we need to focus on get regulations for them. There are no social security for that workforce, which is a much larger workforce, and it's shifting with massive numbers. You can't even fathom the numbers that India is experiencing through those verticals. So those are the answers. Let's solve those issues, not solving the targets being set currently by the people. That will continue.
All right.
That's my point.
But very quickly, I'm going to give Dr. Shetty the last word. Dr. Shetty, is this entire conversation an overestimate of the truth? Or are we at a point where we need to honestly be discussing this?
Productivity should be matched by the human cost, and that I think is very important. Number 2 is competitiveness is again a myth, and if you really go hard to get people working, you will have an unhealthy force after some time. What is very important is let health and the wallet go together. Infertility, impotence, irritability are consequences of long working hours. And why should nurses work late? They should also work for 8 hours as they work all over the world. So I think we are chasing a mirage when we talk about competitiveness. We are chasing a mirage when we talk about productivity. Let all MNCs come out with their health costs, and let all MNCs say the mission and vision which they talk about is transacted on the floor and in offices, and that I think is very important. World Depression Day is 7th. People are committing suicide. Depression is increasing. Let's start talking about depression. Let's talk about working healthy and living healthy.
Absolutely. And we've run out of time on this discussion. I want to point out that while, Sumanth C Raman spent most of this conversation talking about how people should be allowed to work overtime, he's also been massaging his shoulder because he's obviously had a very, very long day, Sumanth C Raman. I have to wrap up this discussion, but while we're talking about people being allowed to work overtime, we're not saying send everybody home after 8 hours, but if we considered instilling some sort of an overtime penalty, would employers then think twice before asking you to work on Sundays and on Saturdays and late nights? And the thing that kept coming up, women and their flexi work hours. Let me point out that when the government increased maternity leave from 3 months to 6 months, what it basically meant is that a woman didn't have to be separated from her child that is 3 months old. Think about that. And I want to just put this out there for everyone who considers a working woman a burden on your team. If women did not have children, what would society do? How can we have a society that is forcing women to choose between working and having children? What will happen then if women choose only to work? What will happen on the other hand if half your workforce decided to stay home? What would be the quality of your output? What would be the quality of our productivity as a country? We need to simply ask these questions. Women are not having children because they want to. Women are having children because they're the only ones who can. And if they didn't, then what would happen to the society that we're looking at today? That's something we have to consider. Thanks for watching.